Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the RStudio Enterprise Community Meetup. I'm Rachel, calling in from Boston, well, really Dorchester today. Today, we're going to learn more and chat with each other about a crucially important topic, accessibility. So ultimately, making sure that our data products can be used by all users. If you've just joined now, feel free to introduce yourselves through the chat window, say hello, maybe where you're calling in from. I do also want to make note that if you want to turn on live transcription during the meetup, you can do so in the Zoom bar below where it says more. To go through a brief agenda, we'll have some short introductions and welcome everyone to the meetup. We'll have a presentation by Maya, A11Y in R, or ally in R. We were just talking about how you say that. Followed by a presentation by Mara on the Highcharts accessibility module. And then a lot of time for Q&A and open discussion to share resources with each other as well. So after the presentation, we'll have lots of time for Q&A, but can also ask a few right after each of the presentations too. Just a reminder that this meetup will be recorded and shared to the RStudio YouTube. So if you do ask questions in the Zoom chat, you'll be part of that recording. If you want to ask questions anonymously, you can do so as well. We have a Slido link for that, and I'll put that in the chat window here in just a moment. But for anybody who's joining for the first time, a special welcome to you all. This is a friendly and open meetup environment for teams to share the work that you're doing within their organizations, teach lessons learned, network with each other, really just to allow us all to learn from each other. So thank you all so much for making this a welcoming community too. I really want this to be a space where everybody can participate and we can hear from everyone. I always like to reiterate this, that we love to hear from everyone, no matter your level of experience in the field too. I'll share a few other links in the chat window too. If you do ever have suggestions or want to speak at one of these in the future, love to hear from you. But with that, it's enough from me. Thank you all again for joining us. I'd love to turn it over to our first speaker, Maya Gans. Maya is a data visualization engineer at Atorus Research, where she develops custom applications using R and JavaScript. I'll stop my share and turn it over to you.
Awesome, thanks so much. Hey everyone, I am so excited to talk about this topic today, but a couple caveats first. One, this is a topic that I am super passionate about as of recent. I am not an expert in this, but I think that it is imperative that we all make considerations for accessibility. And the second thing is that I personally, when creating this talk or creating websites, visualizations, whatever it is, I have my own data visualization blind spots. And so, yeah, that's just how I just wanted to caveat that. That said, this is a really cool topic, and I think we all need to be considering it. As Rachel mentioned, the talk is called A11T, or ally, or accessibility in R. There are 11 letters between A and Y in accessibility, and that is long, and that is why it is abbreviated as such. And again, I am not an expert, but Sarah L. Fossheim is, and their blog posts are incredible, amazing resources. I will be sharing these slides, and all the links are clickable therein. And Sarah, their blog post has a blog post where they go over 10 do's and don'ts in data visualization. So I figured I can adapt those into the R ecosystem. So the blog post begins saying, accessibility should always be a focus when designing products, and the same goes with working with data visualizations and graphs. So the main tenet of the internet is that everyone should have access to it. And likewise, we should be thinking about data visualizations in the same way, thinking about our audience, who is consuming them, and they should be consumable by all. So I'll just jump into our first tenet here. Don't rely on color to explain the data. So I just made a quick bar chart here of where they're grouped by some category. You'll see the code on the left-hand side there. And there are many applications to do this, but here I've linked Cobliss. You can throw in any image into this application and it'll show you the various forms of color blindness. And you'll see here, like this one specifically, you have that middle bar and the top colors are really close together. So throwing your data visualizations into software like this is a quick and easy win to think about how you're going to leverage different colors. Okay, I clicked on that link. Cool. So what can we do? There is a really cool package, GG Pattern, which this is my first time playing with it. You can, if your company has a really strict color palette that is failing some of these colorblind tests, you can leverage different patterns. So here we have different patterns denoting the different categories as well. So leveraging this with the redundancy of color can help to bridge that gap. Okay, here is, for anyone in this talk that knows me, being extra is kind of my MO. So the second tenet is don't use very bright or low contrast colors. So I obviously had to make a custom shiny input widget where you can scroll to see the text color on the background color. And if it passes the WCAG standards, there are AA and AAA standards, which are the less and more strict. If your website is not passing the less strict one, boo, bad. So there's color checkers online, but again, me being extra, I made a little package and made a contrast checker. So because this is an R thing, we could talk about color math. That's a little bit beyond the scope of the talk, but you feel free to play with this in the slides. All right, tenet 3. This is a really good one and honestly very fun to play with. Don't hide important data behind interactions. When thinking about accessibility, something that we have to think about is how many consumers of data are doing so on mobile. That is their primary means of getting and consuming data. So on the left-hand side, I have a Plotly data visualization where on hover, I'm seeing some drill down, the value of these of the chunks here, the categories that comprise the whole bar. That's really cool, but on mobile, we don't really have a hover. So what we can do is leverage click events. So now when I click here, imagine on mobile, you have your plot and then under it, I have some container that will populate with that metadata. And what I'm doing here is clicking on each of these categories. So for anyone who wants to geek out over the code, on the left-hand side, all I want you to focus on is the hover template. I created a custom hover template in Plotly. And then for the click event, which is a little more involved, you have to create that container element. So I made that container and called it Plotly output. So that's just empty. And then using the HTML widgets package, I attached an on render function for the Plotly object, where on click, you grab that element and then shove in the data that you get on click, which Plotly helps you to leverage that click event. So going over the specifics of this code is like my bread and butter. I love this stuff and I love to live in this world and thinking about how desktop consumers are different than mobile consumers. But the specifics of the code, a little bit overboard for this talk. That said, if anyone wants to reach out to me, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever, I am psyched to talk about this stuff. Okay, number 4, don't overwhelm the user with information. When you Google dashboard fatigue, I think the first thing that comes up is Sean Lopp of RStudio, his talk on dashboard fatigue and how to mitigate that. What is dashboard fatigue? When you throw, it is, as a data scientist with a statistical background and not a UI background, it is very tempting to shove all the things into the dashboard because we have access to all the things. But Sean urges us to reel it back. And the goal of a data science team is to help organizations or individuals make better decisions informed by data. Don't show me everything about everything. What is it the user needs? Only show them that. And then when designing a dashboard, it's important to think about leading with the key data. Make that bold and font size 100, or make that visual the biggest one. And then 2 other considerations for not overwhelming the user is to limit the view, the scope, and then let the user, this is like the power of Shiny, right? Where we can let the user change how they filter the data and their focus, slice and dice the data in different ways. Hand that power over to the user rather than just saying, here's 700 plots, have fun. And then finally, a favorite of mine that I see in the wild a lot is when people don't use consistent language and color. So example, plot A and plot B have the same x-axis, but plot A says person 1, 2, 3, and plot B says 1, 2, 3. They're literally the same thing, but you're not using the same like nomenclature. Bad. The second thing is using consistent colors. So in plot A, person 1, 2, 3 is red, green, blue, and then in plot B, you're using a grayscale, but those colors mean the same thing across plots. Try to think of your dashboard as telling a data story and being cohesive throughout that story. So that kind of covers 4 there. Number 5, use accessibility tools when designing. So Rachel mentioned that later we can all geek out and share links because that is the point of these meetups, for us to all learn more. So the biggest link here is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. This is the tome of all the things that you should be considering for accessibility when creating a website. And then you can just glean nuggets from that when creating data visualizations. Here's a different color contrast validator than the shiny one that I created. Google Lighthouse is an incredible tool that you can run on any website. I recommend you, if you're using like a package down or blog down or whatever down, run this on your websites and it will check, it gives you a grade if you're and it checks things like the color contrast checker that I created. It checks things like, do all your images have alt text tags? And it'll walk you through how to make your score 100. So Google Lighthouse is an incredible tool. And then there's the 11T project checklist, which is a great checklist to mentally or literally physically go through when creating a data visualization. Make sure that you cross off everything and consider everything outside of your own personal biases when creating a data visualization. So all these links live in the talk. Okay, use patterns and shapes in addition to color. This one is a little, we talked about it a little bit in point 1. Here in the code, I have the color is equal to category, but use some redundancy there. I also added the shape is equal to the category. This might seem redundant to you, but it could be really helpful to others. Simple, effective, just do it. Using labels and legends. So it is perfectly adequate to use the ggplot default legend that is going to create this color by person legend for you, but I urge you to be creative and let your plot readers be as lazy as possible. I love a transition where I get to read this line and boom, I'm right into person 3. I don't need, my eyes are doing the least amount of work possible. So this is just a simple example of how we can use our creativity to leverage labels and legends. And I included the code here because you have to do some shenanigans with shifting the margins in order to add text outside of the plot. I thought that was a fun little neat trick. So happy to go over that code. It exists here for you to leverage. All right. This is a slide that is a talk in and of itself. So will lends itself to Mara's talk, but there is a library called Chartability. And this is a plot I did not make. It was made by Frank Elvasky. I believe this package is from Visa, but do not quote me on that. This will link out to the observable notebook where this plot was created. In all of my examples till this point, I've been using PNGs with alt text to describe the data visualization. And when writing alt text, you want to really think about, if you were to call your friend on the phone and describe the data visualization, that is what you want to put. Don't just put, this is a bar graph. I didn't get anything from that, right? So what is awesome about the internet is that it uses HTML, which is a hierarchical markdown language, and also learning HTML is a little bit beyond the scope of this, but I just want to show how this library, because it's not a PNG, elements are clickable. And here what I did is I clicked, or you can hit tab to focus on the whole plot. And then when I'm clearly not a keyboard navigator. When you hit enter, so HTML is hierarchical. So hitting tab will find sibling elements. Hitting enter, you'll go into the tree. So here I've hit enter to go into the plot itself. And then I can hit enter again. And the screen readers will read to me that this bar segment is of count 4, category, current status, and it's about the topics covered. And because this 4 is a sibling element to the 4, I can now hit my left and right arrow keys to navigate to the 41. This experience of using the keyboard and not using a mouse at all, I urge everyone to do this. So I am very much a Mac user, but just going over to a blank slate Google page here, if I hit Command F5.
Welcome to VoiceOver. VoiceOver speaks descriptions of items on the screen and can be used to control the computer using only your keyboard. If you already know how to use VoiceOver, press the V key now. If you want to learn how to use voice.
So we can use F5 to use the VoiceOver.
Link, about, link, store. Jocelyn has entered the waiting room. Press CMD+ to open pop-up or go to the participants panel to admit purchase. Jocelyn, audio submenu. Stop. David Doyle has left the meeting. Chrome, Google Chrome, Maya window, link, VoiceOver off.
So I am a super VoiceOver novice. I couldn't even tab from Zoom, which is what I'm using, into this actual Google window. And that is why I urge people to play with this and navigate through using only a keyboard. And at the very least, if you are a Shiny app developer, if you can take from this talk to tab through your application and see what that user workflow looks like, that would be a huge win on my end. So again, I urge people to explore using a screen reader, and how, if that's a new way to experience using a computer for you, as it is for me, it can be incredibly, you want to consider the things that people are going to be tabbing through, maybe leveraging shortcuts in order to make tabbing easier for them, and thinking about keyboard shortcuts and all that kind of stuff is actually really fun. As a side example, if you use a screen reader on Twitter, the first thing it reads to you is an element that a sighted user is never going to interact with. It reads out all the keyboard shortcuts to use when navigating through the website so that you can leverage all the things that someone who's using a mouse could do. Okay, so that is a whole side of using a screen reader that I'm clearly need some work doing, but is a whole nother world of experiencing the internet. All right, number 9 is providing context and explaining your visualization. And the way that I did this is using the annotate function, which is your best friend here to add labels. I realize this text is super small, but at the bottom of the plot, I added all-time low. And at the highest point in the plot, I added record high. This gives the user some broader context for if you have a graph of some snapshot in time, but this is a record high temperature in the past decade or whatever, like it leveraged text to really highlight those important narratives. Another example here is I've created a bar plot, and you immediately are going to go to the maroon segment here because I've leveraged both color and some text, which I very creatively wrote, some event worth highlighting, because that's where your eye is just going to immediately go there. So again, providing context, explaining the visualization, thinking about your audience, what they know, what they don't know, and really trying to communicate that story. And then my last, by Maya, I mean Sarah's, last tenet here is to focus on accessibility during user interviews. So this applies more to creating dashboards and Shiny apps than it does to a single static data visualization, but you still can, you should always be applying this first part in the preparation of creating anything. You should give user personas disabilities. So first of all, what is a user persona? When creating a website or visualization or whatever that you want people that are not yourself to consume, it is really helpful to create detailed narratives of people who are going to be using this application. Sarah, who's the head of HR, is blah, 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 blah. She's going to be navigating through the application to do this. And Bob, who's this, is going to be doing that, right? So fleshing out those stories will help you to live outside of your subjective biases when creating these applications. The next step after preparing is recruiting. When getting people to participate in any of your user studies, you want to make sure you set one-on-one time. You might want to consider a ride share or something like that. You don't know what people's transportation needs are. And then finally, you want to inquire about the assistive technology used, which kind of goes into my last one here when you're conducting the interview. If I were to take a poll for all the people in this room, just the different mechanical keyboards that people use, like we all have vastly different setups and preferences, and everyone in programming is opinionated. So people are going to have different hardware. So if you create an application with one kind of accessibility hardware in mind, and then someone brings in a joystick, you need to account for that. And maybe also have some like AV people there to, to help you with that, because even though I'm a programmer, I don't know how to use a projector. So that could be helpful. And then lastly, you want to just consider that when scheduling these kind of interviews and people work using your application, that these might take longer, because as you saw with the screen reader, there's a lot that goes on there. So again, I'll give out these slides. There's links abound. I hope that I was able to impart some wisdom here, and I hope that if you are new to employing ally techniques into your data visualization, that you share with us kind of what you learn. And yeah, I'm excited to be here and talk with you all.
Thank you so much, Maya. I always like to say we're all clapping, even though you can't hear us right now. We can use little Zoom reactions though. Thank you so much for all of that. I see there's a lot of questions that have started to come in through both the chat as well as Slido. So I'm going to do my best to navigate those. But one of the anonymous questions was, the principle of contrast checker is also applicable for the spatial data map visualizations. Is that true?
Sure. Mara, you're nodding, so.
Yeah.
So we think so. If anyone has,
I think that was a statement, not a question.
I read it as it was written, but there was a question mark at the end. Yeah. So let me rephrase it. So,
well, it's also, there's different contrast that you want to look for. It's contrast checkers are for like the ratio of contrast for text, as opposed to color blindness checkers, which look at what people with different vision situations see. So they're a little bit different, but there are checkers for both, and there are ones that are specifically for maps.
Awesome. Yeah, I see Caleb put in the chat too, cartographer here, and I would say yes. Awesome.
And this is all, I just want to caveat too, sorry, that this is all like, you know, a learning experience, I guess, for me, and thinking about your, you know, outside of your subjective biases, like if there is a gradient that you're using, a default gradient, and you don't know how to create a custom gradient, then leverage alt text, leverage descriptions, leverage, you know what I mean? So it's okay if you're not up to the highest standards in WCAG, but then use the other tools if you can, you know what I mean?
It's a great point, Maya. Let me go over to a question from the chat over here on Zoom. Let's see. I see Nils had asked, are you using a custom Sheridan theme? And I always say that word wrong.
I live for customizing my Sheridan slides, and yes, I am. I use a combination of Canva, creating background images and then importing them into the slides. Talk about extra. Happy to go down that rabbit hole outside of the scope of this talk, though.
Awesome. Thank you, Maya. Let me just see if if anyone has one more question before we go over to Mara, we will have lots of time for question after too. Feel free to just raise your hand on Zoom too. I see Francisco, you just asked a question in the chat if you'd want to unmute yourself and ask live too. Oh, I think I turned on the ability to unmute yourself. I can read it too. The question was, I wonder if Maya could quickly talk about her process of creating a visualization and adding accessibility layers. Do you follow the principles in order?
That's an awesome question. Again, harkening back to my caveat of this being a very new world for me, but I find this incredibly fun and important. There, in the slide deck, there's a link to a checklist. So that is what I've recently been considering. And then I use a combination. I always use lighthouse checks when I'm creating Shiny apps to make sure that all my HTML elements are passing everything. But I think, yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's a matter of synthesizing people who are smarter than me, their information, and I'm happy to share like through blog posts and meetings like this as I learn more, but I think that checklist is a good place to start.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Maya. I'd love to turn it over to Mara for our second presentation. And again, we'll have other time for questions for both Maya and Mara at the end and open discussion too. So I will say, if you're using Slido to ask questions, it'd be really helpful, or actually, if you're using Zoom chat too, really helpful to include Mara or Maya's name if the question's directed to either one of them too. But thank you so much. To introduce our next speaker, we have Mara Averick, and Mara is a developer advocate at RStudio. I'll turn it over to you, Mara.
Awesome. Oh, wait. Hi. Can you hear me?
I can hear you and I can see your slides.
Awesome. Great. So I am using Corto, which you'll learn about in future times, but or you have already learned about. Anyway, this is my first time doing this with Corto, and I will say writing this like very brief talk took me way longer than probably any other talk I've ever written, and really not for lack of materials. I did write a 5-part series of blog posts covering this topic, but in part because I've fallen down the accessibility rabbit hole, right? There's so much to learn and it's really interesting. And I noticed somebody commented on Maya's font at one point. They're like, oh, like, thanks for using a monospace font. Like, you have no idea how much time I spent being like, okay, well, there's Atkinson Hyperlegible, which is good for like distinguishing characters, but that's not as good. Like, that's good for open dyslexic, but it's not as good for cognitive disabilities where you want to have familiar looking shapes. There's a lot, like accessibility is not one size fits all at all. And I ended up talking about like stealing from experts. I'm using Noto Sans, which is what they use on the Ally project and the World Wide Web Consortium on Web Accessibility Initiative for their slides and presentations. So I was like, if it was good enough for them, it's good enough for me. But I just noticed that. Anyway, Rachel kind of covered this about me. My name is Mara, developer advocate at RStudio. I live in Missoula, where it is a balmy 14 degrees right now. Things I did not create. Highcharter, that's good old Joshua Kunst, who is an R package developer. Highcharts, that's done by Highsoft. And just so you know, that's not a complete list of the things that I have not created, but I wasn't going to list all of this. Anyway, so Highcharts is a JavaScript charting library based on SVG that makes it easy for developers to create interactive and accessible charts. The SVG part comes in quite a lot. But so I want to disambiguate what the two things are. And Highcharter is an R wrapper for the Highcharts JavaScript library and its modules. And how did I fall into this? So Sylvia Canelone wrote a great post on resources for data viz accessibility. And they are these general and R-specific resources on how and why to make accessible data visualizations. And at the time of its first writing, the Highcharts accessibility module didn't seem to be working with the Highcharter package. And I'd used Highcharter before, and I kind of remembered, I was like, you know what, like I'm not a JavaScript developer, but if you can make it work in Highcharts, you can usually make it work in Highcharter. So I decided to see if I could do it. So there were a couple of GitHub issues people had filed, and this was my like great motivating example. Was somebody filed an issue saying that keyboard navigation wasn't working. And you know what's really fun, by the way, using keyboard navigation when you're trying to present, I was doing it, right. When you're trying to present a slide deck that uses keyboard navigation. But trust me, I am using my keyboard right now. You can see, look, I did make it work. And look, I can even use my keyboard to do something like view it as a data table, which turns out people want that. And then I could go back and hide the data. Now I'm using my mouse. I could export the data. I could export it as SVG. Hooray, I made it work. And this was not the end of the story. Oh, shoot. Now I'm like stuck in, there we go. Sorry. Anyway, so if we take my journey at the starting point, reading Sylvia's fantastic post, the endpoint, writing a 5-part series on how to do these things with increasingly complex visualizations. The posts have these accessible examples with highcharter and all this R code, which is pretty long. But in the middle here is me learning a bunch of useful things, non-code or framework specific, a lot of great things from Highcharts and highcharter, but also things that apply in general. And this talk will be covering that middle point. Sorry, I know everyone's going to be disappointed by me not reading a lot of code aloud, but yeah, it's there for you to peruse. And I also want to tell you some of the general principles that can be applied from Highcharts and highcharter to your visualizations in general. So a little bit of background on Highcharts and accessibility. So one thing, this is not to say that it's perfect, but Highcharts is not free for commercial use, and it's like a key selling point for them. Tons of companies have to comply with accessibility, like 508 are regulations in the US, and it's a key part of their business model. A lot of companies were already using them before this became the case, but that's a thing. So some of their features, very much, this is like not at all exhaustive, is keyboard navigation, screen reader optimization, low vision features, sonification, voice input, tactile export. So as you can already probably tell there, that actually accommodates a lot of different types of accessibility needs. So for example, voice input for people who have trouble using the keyboard, which is another population. It turns out people who use screen readers have really different preferences. I'll get into more detail about that later. So the background on this is that Highcharts did a collaboration with Elsevier. Oystein Mosang is one of the core developers for Highcharts, and Ted Gies is from Elsevier. Sorry if I'm saying it wrong. And both of whom they're members of the DataViz accessibility advocacy and advisory group. But they kind of got together Elsevier was actually already using Highcharts, and Ted had a lot of background in user testing, and they embarked on this journey of kind of developing this product together through iterative, both accessibility expert testing and user testing. And that's really key. So this is just one quotation from an article about the project that they did from Lucy Greco, who's a web accessibility evangelist. She was one of their test users, and she's been blind since birth. She said, kind of, this innovation allows me to interact with the chart and understand the relationships of all the components of the chart to all the other components, rather than just getting a description of the chart. And that is enabled by the fact that these are SVG. And I, full disclosure, don't know a ton about SVG. They've made it work. And you can drill down in it. I would never be able to come up with that. I'm not an expert. And I also don't have user testing. So this is one of those cases where sometimes using the right tool teaches you a lot. And again, accessibility is hard. So I like using this tool. So more background, if you're curious, they did, the two of them have presented at the CSUN Assistive Technology Conference, is one of the biggest assistive technology conferences. They've presented several times. And I really highly recommend this video interview. This is, I know this is a very, can you see that I'm hovering over that? Can you see it now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, cool. There are a lot of links in here that I hope that you take a look at that, but that video interview is one of them. It's short and it really tells you a lot. Other collaborations that Highcharts has done with the Georgia Tech Sonification Lab, they made a completely open source Highchart Sonification Studio. Because of how I'm navigating through things, if I try and open it, things are going to go a little crazy, so I'm not going to, but very neat to check out if you want to later. All right, so some of the features. So keyboard navigation. Users are able to navigate and interact with several components, right? So the data points, the chart menu, and other chart controls using the keyboard only. So this kind of goes beyond just being able to get to the chart or around the web page on the whole. This means that they can interact with individual elements. And an example of that, this one I didn't make, and again, I'm going to have trouble showing the keyboard navigation awesomeness from presenter view. Let me see if I can get it going by unclicking this and then using my keyboard. I can't, but trust me that you can navigate these things through, and also you'll have the slides so you can see for yourselves. And I did not create that one, but here is one that I did create in R with Highcharter. And one of the things that they found in their research, by the way, since I made this, they've changed their default color scheme to be more accessible, by the way, but it also uses dual encoding. As you can see, there are shapes and patterns that are used for each of these lines. I'm navigating with the mouse right now because of my keyboard issues, but what they found in their research was that, am I doing this? Yes. Okay, now I'm using my keyboard. What they found in their research, and this allows you to navigate individual series, and I'll show you a screen reader demo in a second, but one of the things that they found was that for some users, they preferred using a data table when the data was relatively simple. So you're able to view data table, which doesn't work out that well on a slide. I have to use my mouse, I apologize. And you can export the data if that's what you want. Again, like accessibility is not a one size fits all type of situation. Sonification, I did not create this one, but here is a cool demo of it. That allows somebody who otherwise wouldn't be able to kind of take in that information for themselves to hear patterns without it being described to them, which was a feature that people wanted. And I know we had a low vision user accessibility expert who showed his experience in what it was like to get patterns from sonification. And that was incredibly meaningful to him. You know, like for me, I'm like, I can't remember how this goes, but if you're, for some people, that is a great way to get the information. I also wanted to show you an example of voice input. I had to embed this so that I can have my closed captions on for you.
This video demonstrates using Dragon version 15 to navigate interactive features of Highcharts by announcing the accessible name of buttons and controls. Click JAWS. Click JAWS. Click VoiceOver. Click VoiceOver.
All right, so I'm going to end it there, but that is using voice input to click and drill down on data series, which is pretty neat. Screen reader accessibility. Now, this is one part of it. This is for screen reader accessibility for individual points. So one of the things that they found, again, with user studies was that rather than having these really long descriptions, a lot of users preferred that that they get the information only when they need it. So I apologize about this more video situation. So this allows a user who can use their keyboard to hear what is happening at each point.
1. December 2010, 34.8%. NVDA. 1. December 2010, 20.2%. VoiceOver. 2. May 2012, 30.7%. VoiceOver. 3. January 2014.
Cool. And oh, by the way, you might note here, and this will come up more later, is that this is actually, these are the most common desktop screen readers. And they, as you'll find out as I continue, They do not all, they all have platform specific and sometimes browser specific accessibility APIs. So when you're testing something, it's not as easy as being like, use a screen reader. They actually all work a little bit differently. So testing is pretty extensive. Is it perfect? I don't know. I can't say, but it's pretty darn good. Is it impressive? Yes. Is it way better than anything I'd be able to do by myself? Absolutely. So why is it so impressive? Well, gets at what I was talking about before. So assistive technology and the accessibility tree. So this is an example with an application. So an application is broken down into something called an accessibility tree. And those nodes can be grouping nodes that are hierarchical, or they can be individual elements that you can interact with in different ways. So it could be something that you could click, that could have a state, that could have a role. And again, this is a platform-specific accessibility API that creates that accessibility tree. And then that goes from the assistive technology to the user. So I guess I'll go over this quickly just because I've taken a longer time than I thought. So an example, this would be with using VoiceOver, that the app translates an element into an accessibility node, VoiceOver visits it, VoiceOver announces what it is, then the user, in this case would be using the keyboard, they can press it, VoiceOver tells them what they did, the click event is routed back to the UI element, and something happens. Cool, you might be thinking like, well, I'm not developing that. Turns out it's pretty similar on the web. So in the browser, and browsers vary from in terms of what they do, this pretty much goes to the DOM, the document object model, the tree that is created for us. And what screen readers see is controlled by their accessible rich internet application roles, that's ARIA, and the HTML. So it's in parallel, the tree is painted into a visual UI and transformed into an accessibility tree, which varies by browser, which is then read via the native API for the assistive technology and brought to the user. So this is like not a simple thing to solve. And yeah, cool. All right, so now I'll talk a little bit about what I learned from using the accessibility module. This is a chart that I created in R using Highcharter. I'm not showing you the code because it's super long, but don't worry, it's in the source documents. It's navigable by keyboard. I can export. I have an annotation, and all right, so what's the magic here? Here's where some of the screen reader cool stuff comes in. And Maya, I think, mentioned this before, so with Twitter. So if you go and you inspect the HTML for this, it's actually created a hidden screen reader region that if you look at, it's ARIA hidden equals false. So that means that it's visible to a screen reader. And then there are other regions of the chart that are hidden, but it is visually hidden to a user who's looking at a visual representation. And then this, back from that first article, this is where Ted and the developers added the structure description of a chart that could benefit screen reader users, such as the chart type, axis information, which is partially automatically generated, and a long description of what's found in the chart provided by the creator. So again, it's not one size fits all, right? Part of what they found was that users, they wanted not to have to go through every element in order to get the description, or they wanted to be able to skip certain elements early on. And this is a case where you have two different ways of accessing similar information that accommodates different users. So the default format for that screen reader section is, so the chart title, basically the type description, what kind of chart it is, chart subtitle, chart long description. I will get back to that in a moment. A play a sound button if you have soundification disabled. The view table button Can you see me highlighting? Oh God, what just happened? Sorry.
I could see it. Yep.
Cool. I'm glad you could see it. And now I'm back so far. And I'm sorry if anybody's motion sensitive, close your eyes. I'll tell you when it's back. All right. So that view table button comes up pretty quickly. And that's because for simple data structures, a lot of people preferred that. And the chart long description, some people don't like that. And there's an easy way for them to skip it. So again, making different affordances for different personas. So for that penguins chart I showed you before, what does my screensaver section look like? Again, title and chart info, flipper length versus bill length. That's, the title that I entered. It tells you what kind of chart it is, a scatter chart, how many data series, 3, and then a subtitle that I added myself. Axis descriptions and ranges. These, this is a combination of auto generation and user generation. So for example, when I wrote this code, the x-axis description, I specifically wrote out displaying flipper length in millimeters, knowing that it would be in this special area. And that they would be able to then skip the x-axis description elsewhere. The range can either be automatically generated, which is what I did in this case, or the developer, the creator can write it in. There sometimes it can't be automatically generated because let's say it's categorical. You're going to be like range from broccoli to carrot. It's not a good example, but that's what I'm thinking of. All right. And then the annotations. And this is a big, a big deal that I didn't really know about. And I'm showing you an example that just has one annotation, but there's another one in the blog post that has lots of them, is that the chart annotation summaries come up because often with annotations, we're saying what the most important information is. So it says some stuff is what you write into, sorry, this horizontal scrolling is great. So you write in your annotation, but it also is using information from the data points. So flipper length, that's the x-axis of this length and the y-axis of this length, that can be automatically generated. So a combination of human and technology working together. All right, so I skipped over the chart long description before, where you are most irreplaceable. You're not irreplaceable at any point, but this is where you can say more. And what belongs there? Well, it depends. And it depends on what? Well, a couple of things. One is both the intention of the chart, so what you're trying to convey, and it depends on whom you ask. So in the user studies, as I mentioned before, they found that it was important that it be skippable. But in some other research, which wasn't done by Highcharts that came out, what belongs there in general? A text summary of the visualization, making sure to describe trends or patterns in the visualization. But different kinds of description contain different kinds of content. And this was a study done recently about a 4-level model of semantic content in different descriptions. These 4 levels, the first one is kind of the stuff that I covered automatically. So the elemental and the encoded properties, that's things like title, legend, chart type, what are the ranges? Second level was statistical concepts and relations. So things like computable descriptive statistics. And now as there's statisticians here, you might start to think like, wow, I definitely don't want a computer automatically saying the descriptive statistics that are the wrong statistics for the kind of, for the distribution I'm showing. You can see how human intervention would be useful there. The third level was perceptual and cognitive phenomena, which basically means stuff conveying kind of the overall gist of complex trends and patterns, exceptions, outliers. And then the fourth level was contextual and domain-specific insights. So like social and political explanations for trends and stuff that depends on an individual's reader's subjective knowledge. And some of the interesting takeaways from this study were that Description. So the study was done with both blind and sighted reader groups, and they found that descriptions are important to both blind and sighted reader groups, but that those reader groups differ, almost diverged significantly on which semantic content they ranked as most useful. So not everybody says that the same stuff is useful. And this was interesting to me because there you're really saying like, okay, what you think as a sighted person might be most useful might be very different from what a blind user thinks. And then even within that, access to meaningful information is strongly reader specific. All right, so that was kind of, and I really, really recommend you check out this paper. It's very, very good. Running out of time. So lessons learned through using this API. Use tools, they're great. I learned a ton from using this tool. And stuff that I wouldn't have thought of. And different tools make different things easy or harder, and you learn a lot. But don't rely on tools. So there are limitations to technical fixes. Accessibility isn't one size fits all. In fact, what helps one user could be a hindrance to another. So things like patterns for dual encoding can be really useful to some people and can be really distracting or even harmful to others. And you need to make affordances for those user preferences. Look to experts. There are people who are experts in this, but it is kind of a nascent field. There aren't really great WCAG guidelines on semantics for things like SVG. Get feedback from lots of different. Maya covered this nicely. And keep learning. I think that's one of the things I've learned. Like literally since I did this, the Highcharts API has changed and improved. And this, it really is kind of a young area of study. So these you can access in my slides. These has the R code and the working examples, the blog post series, which if you're interested in, you can see them. Resources, the 10 guidelines for data viz accessibility, Oystein Moseng, who's one of the Highcharts core developers, that paper I mentioned earlier, the accessible visualization via natural language descriptions. The data viz accessibility and advocacy group has like an ever-growing collection of resources. This really great piece I read by low vision user who uses screen reader every day on alt text. It's really short and one of the best things I've ever read about it. It was all these things I, as a sighted user, would never think of. And then the Ally project is a great like meta resource for more resources. And then references, there were a lot of them. And don't worry, you'll be able to scroll and see these. And also I can render it so they're larger. And that is it.
Thank you so much, Mara. Thank you for all those resources at the end too. I know I shared the slides earlier, but it might be helpful to reshare them in the chat right now too.
They're no longer coming up. I just pasted it again. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you. I see a few questions on Slido that have come through and in the Zoom chat. But I do want to just bring everybody into the conversation too. So I know this is kind of hard on Zoom, but if you want to jump in and ask questions too, you can raise your hand on Zoom, or I can call on you from the Zoom chat. We'd love to just learn from you all as well, what resources have been most helpful for you, or other packages and things you want to share with people too. Mara, I see David had asked a question on Zoom. Does anyone know a way to add sonification that isn't with Highcharts? And I think there were a few recommendations of packages too.
I know there are ways, and they don't all use Highcharts. I think one of the, let me get back to you on that. I haven't used the other ways, but there are other ways. And that Sonification Studio isn't actually part of Highcharts, so you can use it for anything.
Awesome.
I know there's an R native way too.
Yeah, I think Riva shared Sonify and Tune R packages that you can use. But yeah, any other recommendations of packages too would be really helpful. Let's see. I see, Zach, you have your hand raised. Do you want to jump in live?
Yeah, can do. So this one's for Maya. So about the clicking on the Shiny app, is there, would I have, I've kept a ggplot at the moment. Would I have to learn Plotly, or is there a ggplot way of doing it? Just interested to.
Have to is a really funny thing. Yes, you have to. No, you can totally use ggplot outputs. Again, it gets into like creating alt text for those outputs. And I don't know if anyone has played around with or done research on like when you dynamically create a plot in Shiny, also have alt text come along for the ride with it. I personally, like, my journey geeking out into accessibility is very young, very green in the space, but I'm super excited about trying to automate some level of description. Mara talked about the dangers in doing that, but also like the baseline of having nothing, like it's better than that. So there's that gray area.
Theoretically, if you render it as an SVG, then you could create events on those SVGs if you made it so that you could focus on each one of those. Then you would have ARIA roles that you would have to manually assign to them, saying how they were related back to the chart, so where they come from. And then the data that is, there's no standard for this, but the data that is with it. That's where I'm like, boy, would it be easier if I had a tool that already did this for me. Like, that's where I'm like, I don't know how to do that, but it's possible.
Yeah, because that's the big thing that I took away was, yeah, a lot of my, and also I commented on earlier, I use red, amber, green, because of course everyone goes use the RAG system, which of course red and green aren't the most accessible for color blindness. That was a thing that I picked up on. So yeah, thank you very much, both of you.
But you can use text with that too. Like, for example, in the Shiny widget I had, that those, if you picked like blue text on a blue background, the box turned red, but under it I had bad with an X on it, you know? So yeah. If you, because that's like traffic lighty norm, you want to leverage things that people see in the real world, but also you can, like how Mara talked about dual encoding, thinking about just giving users opting into different ways of interacting with the data.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Zach. I see Al or AL, sorry, I'm not sure if that was just your initials, on Zoom asked, for a user who is blind or partially sighted and has never seen a scatter plot, is it helpful to tell them that it's a scatter plot? What will they do with that information? Also, how do these charts handle screen zoom or magnifying?
Yes, so Highcharts deals with zoom and magnifying. That's like another one of their big features, and mobile. Again, I'm like, great, I don't have to build anything like that. And yeah, so that is actually in that paper on semantic content. One of the recommendations, they're like, here's where you could go into detail about what it means to be a scatter plot, you know, and so that's one option. And that's also where you kind of want to gauge your audience. Is saying the chart type relevant? Well, if you've never seen it before, if you have seen it before, I don't think that it might say something about how you'll end up navigating it if you become familiar with it. So for example, for a scatter plot, you're going to want to be going between groups and zooming in. But yeah, like I've said many times before, what's useful for one user isn't necessarily useful for another one. So
just adding to that too, if you, like, let's say we have radio buttons where the user can toggle between seeing a scatter plot or a line plot, then you need some indicator, an ARIA role that, okay, I'm seeing the thing that I clicked in the other thing, you know, so it could tie it back in that way too.
Great, thank you. I see Caleb had asked on Zoom earlier, is the annotate function built into ggplot? I think that was during your talk, Maya.
Yeah, there's a million packages that people that are smarter than me have written as well. Like there's it's escaping me. I'm sure someone could throw it in the chat, like a labeler that will label all your points, and you can even set like if-else statements to only label things you care about.
GG highlight. Yeah.
Thank you.
And
there's
GG labeler.
There you go.
I was going to write that in the chat. Could someone share the link to that so we just remember to share it later? I'm also going to stop the recording right now too, if people want to just like jump in the conversation, and that would make people feel more comfortable too. But let me stop that. But thanks all.